Women's football is being plagued by ACL injuries. Not only that, but players are succumbing to them at a quicker rate than seems to be the case in the men's game. But what's the reason for this, and what can be done about it? When England captain Leah Williamson ruptured her anterior cruciate ligament in March, she became the latest high-profile female footballer to join the long list of players who've sustained an ACL injury. 5 of the 20 nominees for the 2022 Ballon d'Or Féminine, Alexia Putellas, Beth Mead, Vivian Miedema, Caterina Macario, and Marie-Antoinette Katoto all sustained an ACL injury in 2022. Putellas' injury was particularly cruel, as the 2-time Ballon d'Or winner missed the Women's European Championship after rupturing her ACL on the eve of the tournament. Manchester United defender Aoife Mannion has also suffered 2 ACL injuries in recent years. The Athletics Women's Football podcast spoke to Fortius Clinic knee surgeon and ACL specialist Andy Williams. He completed Manchester City winger Chloe Kelly's ACL surgery in 2021 and Manchester United defender Aoife Mannion's ACL surgery in 2022. Williams discussed the physiological and environmental factors that put female footballers at greater risk of sustaining these injuries, where future research in this area needs to focus on, and what can be done to prevent these ruptures. Women do have a significantly higher risk of ACL rupture than men, and that risk is probably 7 times greater. It's immense, really, Williams said. But what are some of the factors? Well, most obviously, some players can just be unlucky. Injury can strike any footballer at any time. But a more layered explanation is that the standard of women's football has risen rapidly in a very short space of time, as too has the intensity of competition and the resulting fatigue among players. Williams also describes a lessening difference between men's and women's football, but one which is still a factor. In the men's game, he says, the boys with talent are usually picked out by the time they're 10 years of age, and they receive the best training and become very good athletes very early. The athleticism protects them from injury. By contrast, while the development of young women's players is evolving across the game, previously players spent far less time in academies and fewer years being built into what Williams describes as well-to-put-together athletes. And a further biological explanation relates to knee structure. Williams explains that women tend to be a little less bow-legged than most of the male players. If you look at a male team, most of the players have bowed legs. Women tend to have straighter or occasionally knock knee alignment, and that's a risk factor. Within the middle of the knee joint at the end of the femur, which has a notch in it, that notch might be smaller in women, and that's where the ACL lives. If that notch is smaller, it means there's less room for excursion of the ligament, and it's more likely to get chopped by the femur moving onto it. And speaking to Sky Sports in 2022, Dr. Emma Ross, a female health specialist, also spoke of the role played by the menstrual cycle. When estrogen is elevated in the menstrual cycle, and that happens in about the 2nd week, it can affect the stability of joints. Speaking to the Inside the WSL column, Dr. Stone explained that it can interfere with the collagen in our joints and can create looser, more lax joints. A loose joint is therefore less stable and more inclined to injury. The full link between the menstrual cycle and increased injury risk isn't fully understood yet. Similarly, while women's feet differ in a variety of ways, and playing in boots made specifically for men also carries an injury risk, the effect upon ACL injuries specifically is hard to determine. Ahead of the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, manufacturers are releasing women-only boots. But further research and development is still required. For players who do suffer ACL injuries, there's a further risk post-recovery. ACL reconstruction surgery involves taking a graft, and for football players, Andy Williams, the Fortuitous Clinic knee surgeon, prefers to take that from the front of the knee, a process known as a patella tendon graft. But he says women have smaller patella tendons as a physical issue, because they also typically join the athlete level later. When they were growing, they didn't have the stresses that caused reaction from the body to produce bigger, stronger tissue. So there is a practical issue in that everything is smaller. So what can be done? Well, the growth of women's football and the booms in attendance and interest clearly warrant greater diligence surrounding this issue, and data is a priority for Williams. There's a lot of data on men's sports, but women's data is really weak. When I've done my research to follow up on what happened to players after injury, it's all on the internet for men. You can find what happened to a 16-year-old at a certain club. How long did they last? When did they get back? But the women just vanish. He also describes the need to better protect players' knees, saying that a risk of ACL rupture or re-rupture is bad mechanics when athletes land. Women will tend to drop their knees inwards and effectively describe a knocked-kneed position. That's a risk factor in men as well, but it's much more common in women. If we can work out how to counter that and train female athletes to deal with that as second nature without thinking about it, it might protect them. Until further research can be concluded, it's imperative that overload and fatigue are avoided. And that, according to Andy Williams, players spend more time in the gym, getting strong, doing drills that will heighten their ability to play safely, shock absorb safely, and remain stable, rather than simply using football to become a good footballer. Previously, people didn't invest their time and effort because it boils down to money, he says. The male players are often viewed as major financial assets, so they get protected, whereas the female players are often an oversight or second best, and it's really unfair. Despite their sport's booming popularity and the obstacles that have been placed in their way in the past, this is clearly an area in which women footballers are treated as second-class citizens. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.